and welcome back. Now I'm delighted to introduce our next headliner, who directs IBM's product design and investment strategy, expert labs, global software product development, marketing, and field operations across the company's vast software portfolio. Here to talk about Trustworthy AI from principle to practice, please welcome Robert Thomas, Senior Vice President of IBM Cloud and Data Platform. Welcome, Robert. Over to you.
Trustworthy AI. It's a topic you hear a lot about, but maybe everybody doesn't have the same understanding of what that means. I'm Rob Thomas with IBM, and I want to talk about how we take trustworthy AI from principle to practice and what you can do in your business today. Historical examples, though, often help us. Let's think about the food industry. Until the late 1960s, there was very little information about what went into the foods that we were buying. It was an era where most food was prepared at home. It was very common ingredients coming out of the garden or coming off your farm. So we didn't really need a lot of information. But as food production began to change, we started doing longer shelf time, artificial additives, and it wasn't until 1969 that a White House conference recommended that the Food and Drug Administration develop an approach to understanding ingredients and the nutrition in food. So all these years, then 1969, finally there's a decision to start to look at something. But this is what's interesting. It took another 20 years. It was until 1990 when the FDA published rules that mandated nutrition labels on packaged food. So think about it this way. There was a stasis, a new era developed, there was the recognition of a need, but then it took 20 years to get the right safeguards in place. I think you would agree at the rate and pace that AI is happening, we don't have that much time. We can't take 20 years to figure out what's the best way for companies to manage AI. Because we're at an impending event where AI is going to either be immensely helpful or it could be problematic. And as I talk about trustworthy AI today, the examples that you're going to see, I think you're going to understand that there's a way you can do this today and do it the right way. And that's what I'm really excited to talk about. Software is the lingua franca of business. It is how all communication is going to occur. It's how all commerce is going to occur. And software is the accelerator. We certainly saw that as we were dealing with COVID as a way to accelerate how many companies were doing things like customer service. But here's the real question about software. Can you use it to help anticipate and respond quickly to change that's happening? Can you understand all your data? Can you collect your data, organize your data, analyze your data, and fuse it into business processes? This is ultimately about how do you bring intelligence to how your business is running. It starts with the data. Your AI is only as good as your data, but then it comes down to what is the intelligence of your AI? Is it able to drive meaningful outcomes? We have the lucky opportunity to be working in AI for over a decade now and doing it with businesses around the world. We've now done 40,000 customer engagements. It's across 20 industries, 80 countries. And that's taught us a lot because experimenting, iterating, it leads you to a lot of different points. What it's really taught us is that there's 3 critical ingredients as you think about AI for business. And those 3 are language, automation, and trust. I'll just give you a little description. Language is about understanding words, text, documents, everything that a business needs to understand what is happening day to day. Automation is about how do you take what's happening in your business, whether it's a business process, whether it's your IT operations, how do you automate that in a way that, not that you don't need humans to do the work, but you give those humans superpowers. You enable them to do more, to be more productive by using AI. And then third is trust. Trust is this critical ingredient. I covered this when I was talking about my 5 predictions for trusted AI. And trust is about, do you understand the ethical principles, how AI can be used? AI is only as good as data, so it's also, where does your data come from? Can you trust your data? Can you mitigate risk, meet your compliance requirements? This is all about putting responsible AI into practice in your organization. And ultimately, you've got to have greater confidence in the outcomes that you're getting with this. So let's talk about a couple of examples. COVID-19 vaccinations, obviously a very popular topic here in 2021. One area that IBM's helping 2 customers is on vaccine rollout. And it's on 2 different fronts. With the Ad Council, we've launched an education initiative that's called It's Up to You to responsibly address vaccine hesitancy. With the IBM Watson Advertising Accelerator, it's continuously learning how are people responding to messages around the vaccine, what's making them comfortable, what's making them uncomfortable. It enables the Ad Council to use AI to drive outcomes. Another example is Kroger. Kroger is playing a crucial role in the nationwide vaccine rollout. They've not only rolled out a vaccine scheduler that handles the initial shots, the booster shots, they've also enabled security that keeps out any of the bots or bad actors that could try to disrupt this. And with IBM Watson, they're able to answer questions, streamline the process, involve their customer service reps in the hardest problems, but not in all the problems. And it really is helping them drive a differentiated outcome around the vaccination. So again, these are just 2 examples that show you how this notion of AI for business, language, automation, trust can impact organizations today. So now I want to get to this topic of ethics, because ultimately a company has to think about what are their principles around ethics and AI usage. At IBM, we coined a phrase that we call trust and transparency. And we've laid out and articulated what we think are the important aspects of AI trust and transparency that every organization should consider. It's things like AI is augmenting humans. It's not replacing them. It's giving them superpowers, making them better. It's about data and insights. They belong to the creator. So when we work with businesses, the data, the insights generated, those belong to the business, not to IBM, because it's their data. And third is about AI has to be transparent. It has to be explainable. These are really the foundational components for how we think about ethics, trust, and transparency. But then you fast forward to, well, now how do you go deeper? Because once you go to ethics, then you have to go to governed data and AI, because that's about the process. That's about how are you able to do it. And we've laid out 5 aspects around governed data and AI. It's things like transparency, explainability, fairness, robustness, privacy. I now want to dig into each of those 5 because I think they're really important to understand. But again, think about big picture. It's ethics, then it's governed data and AI, and then it's open and diverse ecosystems. And I'll come back to those. So let's dig into each of these topics. So first of all, transparency. Transparency is about reinforcing trust. And it's the best way to promote transparency is through disclosure. We launched something called AI Fact Sheets 360. And this is a project to increase people's and businesses' understanding of how AI was created. To give you a simple analogy, think of this as it's almost like the nutrition label, back to the example I started with, for how is your AI being used in the organization. So that's transparency. Explainability. An AI system should be transparent, particularly about what went into its recommendations, but also be explainable to the business. You can understand all the inputs, but if you can't actually explain how a decision is being made, or why a decision is being made, or how the AI arrived at a conclusion, then you have a challenge. That's why we are now introducing AI fact sheets into the IBM Watson portfolio this year. Because again, back to this notion of nutrition labels, When you have fact sheets embedded as part of Watson AI, then you've got that built-in nutrition label. You understand how it's being used, who's using it, how the decisions are being made. It gives you that stamp of approval that it took 20 years in the case of food to get to, but it gives you that now for AI because we really can't wait. Next is fairness. AI helps people make fairer choices. It counters our human biases. It promotes inclusivity and equitable treatment. That is tremendous. You probably haven't heard that from many people because it's much more exciting to talk about all the bad things AI can do. But if you look at the other side of the coin, AI gives you the ability to eliminate biases. One of our flagship offerings is Watson Studio on Cloud Pak for Data. Recently, Gartner announced us as a leader among the providers of comprehensive and responsible AI and governance. And again, that's because we're able to demonstrate how we can monitor and manage models so that they run fairly and free of unintentional bias. It's really a differentiator for how you can think about bringing AI into your environment. It can monitor fairness, it can track your AI models, it can validate that you're meeting regulatory risk. This is what every company needs as you think about scaling AI in your world. Next is robustness. As AI becomes more a part of our daily lives, it also becomes more at risk for attack. Let's be honest, the more we use it, the more likely somebody's going to want to try to disrupt it. That's why IBM Research has invested in a project that we call Adversarial Robustness 360. And we created and then donated an open source toolbox, which we donated to the Linux Foundation. This is all about helping developers and researchers evaluate and defend models against a variety of different threats. And I'd say there's a lot more to come on this topic. This is why we contributed it into open source, because we need the broadest community helping us protect AI from bad actors. The last aspect of governed data and AI is privacy. And paramount to trusted AI is this topic of how do I make sure that my data and insights remain true to me? We understand that there's different needs across highly regulated industries. That's why you've seen things like our financial services cloud, which introduces all the controls that you need to protect your data, protect your AI in a compliant way. We also recently launched data privacy for open pages with Watson. So if you think about everything open pages brings in terms of governance, risk, and compliance, a holistic view of sensitive data across an organization, we can now add AI on top of that, which completely changes the way that you can automate and then trust all of your processes around GRC. We think this is going to really change how organizations can protect themselves, but also benefit from AI. And now we're introducing something called federated learning. It opens up a whole new world of training fairer, more useful AI models, because then you can use your data regardless of where you've decided to store it. It gives you a lot of flexibility. You're not penalized, taxed, or delayed by having data in one place versus another. It respects data privacy in countries if you're subjected to that, or compliance situations. This is really about changing the notion of how you're transparent of what's happening in your data and your AI. So now I want to come back to how I was discussing these aspects: ethics, governed data and AI, and then the open and diverse ecosystem. So I talked about ethics, the key way that we establish trust, transparency in our principles. We talked about all the aspects of governed data and AI. What does this have to do with ecosystem? Well, to achieve trustworthy AI at scale, it's going to take more than one company or one organization to lead that charge. Trustworthy AI relies on an open and an inclusive ecosystem to use governed technologies to practice these ethical principles. This is why we donated the Fairness Toolkit that I described. And it's also why we've joined the World Economic Forum initiated Global AI Action Alliance, which is about driving AI responsibility worldwide. This committee is being co-chaired by our chairman and CEO, Arvind Krishna. And again, it's IBM seeing the opportunity to be a steward on this topic, which I think sometimes there's a little confusion on. So we hope to disavow any of the confusion and really help each of you become comfortable using AI in your company. So with that, I want to close with an example. I'll come back to this notion of trust is about moving from principle to practice. And I think the Clorox company is an excellent example of this. We just celebrated the third class of Women Leaders in AI last month. And what really struck me looking at that class is how central this notion of trusted AI was to almost everybody's work that was being done. One of those honorees was Clorox, who acted swiftly during the pandemic. They advertised machine learning, natural language processing, using that technology for tailored messages. They're dealing with supply shortages, surging demand for Clorox. They were able to proactively relay information to anxious consumers, and they provided resources and support over and over again. They were able to adapt in a way they could not have if they'd not been using AI. They were sharing information broadly about how their products could bat the virus and keep families safe and reassure them. They were later ranked number one, by the way, for integrity, reflecting public trust in a nationwide survey. This is a perfect example. There was a problem. They adapted. They were able to put all these principles that I talked about into practice. And they were recognized for that, and they should be. So congratulations to the Clorox team. I'd like to thank you for your trust in IBM, our partnership, and what you did for all of us as we were dealing with the confusion in the early days of the pandemic. I want to thank you for your time today. I hope you learned a little bit more about trusted AI and what that can mean for you and your business. I'm going to challenge you to think about how can you go from principle to practice in your organization today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.